Okay, what could possibly go wrong?
Welcome to a short video about the Soldiers, Sailors and Airmen's Family Association with Duncan Leese and myself, Rebecca Ross. Duncan, we've known each other for 14 years, yet we've never really spoke about what the work you do for SSAFA.
40 years?
14.
14?
14.
Oh,
14.
Okay. Well, the problem is that almost everything I do for SSAFA clients is confidential. So, yes, I tend not to speak about it much at work.
We both had fathers in the army.
We did. Mine was in the Scots Guards, posted to London, and hence me being born there with a funny accent. But were you not born in Berlin?
I certainly was.
Was that an unusual upbringing? Or?
No, it was more unusual because I was 10 when we came out of the army. It was more unusual going into sort of mainstream regular schools.
Yeah.
I hadn't known any different up till then.
I mean, my father grew up in an orphanage and joined the Guards as a boy soldier. So when he came out into civilian life, it's the first time he'd ever been in an environment without his time organised for him. And like many ex-military, he found that difficult at first. And at the time, SSAFA stepped in and helped him get his head around that.
So it's not new then?
No, dates back to 1885, and still do much the same as it did then, although by very different methods. But we're there to help and support the UK's military personnel and their families, both while they're serving and after they're left. And personally, it's the latter that I normally do, working with ex-service.
Does SSAFA cover all the three services?
Yep, Army, Navy and RAF, and in this area also civilian maritime, which I do some of. But it was very simple. There was a slogan when I joined, one day service, a lifetime of support. And personally, I've been a caseworker for 20 years, and I do regular training updates to keep my knowledge current. And just for you, look, I've brought along my long service award, which I'm not going to put on because you'll do old man jokes about me.
Okay, no old man jokes then. But can you actually remember what we were talking about?
No, not really.
Well, I was going to ask, what is it you actually do?
So when a new referral comes into our office at Kinloss, the case is offered to a caseworker like myself, and it's up to us whether or not we want to take it on. And if I do decide to accept it, then it's up to me to run that case start to finish. The referral might come from the client themselves, although it's probably more common that it comes from a third party, such as a public agency or possibly another charity or third sector organisation. And I'll then have an initial phone conversation with the client to establish just basic details. And usually that will then transpire in me arranging to meet them face to face. And I prefer to do that at their own home.
Has COVID changed that?
Well, yes, and it's a real pain because the huge advantage of meeting somebody at their home is that I get to establish a level of trust with the person more easily, and I can get a feel of how they're living too. Because over the years, what I've found is it's very common for a client to come to us and ask for some fairly minor help, but really it's the tip of the iceberg with their circumstances. So we have an ethos of preferring to help a client once, but thoroughly. Doesn't always work, but that's what we aspire to do. And this will almost certainly involve knitting together a team of people, both from public sector agencies and other third sector organisations, and collectively to assist with whatever the problems are. So analysing the issues and getting the right people involved and coordinating the package of help is my job and the skill that I'm trained for.
So can you access money if that's part of the need?
It often is, and yes, I often can, but there has to be real need and there has to be a good case, and establishing both, again, is my task. And we start looking at statutory grants and benefits, and then move to civilian, and then ultimately to military sources for money. And SSAFA has a good reputation with funders, and that certainly helps. And I find that solving something relatively minor for a client is a great way of building credibility and letting them into the bigger issues with me.
Have you got a practical example?
It is hard because of confidentiality, but in generalities, a common scenario would be somebody who's been perhaps a good soldier, comes back into civilian life, still young, still active, but somehow feeling a bit lost. Things are very different. It could be that alcohol, prison, debt, broken families, antisocial behaviour all come into play in some form or another. Quite possibly they've been a nightmare to the local council services through frustration. They might have been rude to staff. They might owe a load of back rent. They might have told the job centre staff to naff off. All in all, they're just refusing help. And sometimes my military connection can make all the difference and allow me an in. And then with sort of due respect and persistence, I can start building that trust. And surprisingly, it often works. Although it is common that I'll reach a point where the client has moved on and no longer wants my help. And I'm also need to have the skill to know when to say, okay, cheerio, I'm out of the picture now.
So that's a typical case.
It's typical in its multi-layered nature, but clients do come in all different shapes and sizes. And the next client might be a sweet wee old lady who's just reached that stage in life where she needs a bit of help and support. And I find that typically local authorities and so on are really good at doing that once you get the right people engaged and in on the picture.
Are there any cases you really don't like?
A lot of caseworkers find it difficult to deal with folk at the end of their life. For some reason, I don't. It can be that in their last days, a person has an issue they want resolved or something sorted out or organised just to get peace of mind, and I'm quite happy doing that. I suppose the ones I really don't like, and it happens occasionally, is you get people who really aren't in real need, and they just, they're after the money, and really as soon as they start telling me a load of rubbish, I struggle to be as polite as perhaps I should. So I really don't like that kind of case.
A big topic for Third Sector Week is examples of where joint working between the third sector and public sector organisations can work together to make a real difference to people's lives. I understand about the confidential issues, but can we end with you giving a specific example of a case you've done demonstrating that?
Yeah, okay, what I'll do is I'll go back in time a wee bit. One of the benefits of been doing this so long. And I'll talk about a case where I know really that the people have moved on and can't be identified. So this was an unusual example of where I was working for the ex-serviceman's family and not really for the ex-serviceman. And a good team of experts from whom the case came were already engaged with the family, and they'd evolved a plan for the family's future and how they could move on. The father was in prison. There were 3 children, 2 teenage and one a bit older. I think I won't go into what had happened within the family, but it was truly, truly shocking. And many years later, unfortunately, I still remember all the details. The public agency experts were able to give the family really all the emotional and legal support that they needed. And the eldest sibling, who was a very impressive young lady, was going to take on the parental role. So that was really very much under control. But there was a concern that the story would become public knowledge in the community where they lived. And that would really not be helpful to these young people moving on in their lives. So the solution, really mutually agreed, was that they needed to move geographically elsewhere, allowing them then to move on in an emotional sense. So as I said, there was already a really good team of professionals involved, giving them all the kind of emotional and sort of practical help that they needed with looking at their future. And my job was to come in and do the other practical stuff, which was sorting out how to get them relocated to a different part of the country. And yes, of course, that did involve finance. It involved a lot of organisation. So I just took on and did that, which allowed both the family and the local authority professionals to concentrate on the bit they were really good at, of the emotional stuff. And that's how we work in partnership. And neither one of us could really have done that without the other. And I believe that's how it should always work.
Thank you, Duncan. That's exactly the kind of thing that the Third Sector Week's all about.